Imagine a warrior's body, not as a temple, but as a septic tank. His gut, a writhing nest of foot-long maw-worms, his blood thinned by parasites burrowing into his flesh. This wasn't a rare sickness for the Vikings. Forensic science has now confirmed this was their horrifying everyday reality. These aren't guesses from dusty books. This is the grim story told by their own fossilized filth, excavated from the latrine pits where they lived. But here's the puzzle mainstream history ignores. Other records claim Vikings were obsessively clean, bathing weekly and combing their hair daily. How could both be true? How could a people so focused on grooming live inside a walking plague? The answer is a paradox, hidden not just in their habits, but in a bizarre, painful ritual of physical modification we've only recently uncovered. What they did to their own bodies is more disturbing than the parasites they carried. To understand how they survived, you have to see what they carved into their own bones. Keep watching if you have the stomach to see the evidence for yourself. His name is lost to history, but the state of his body is not. He is the walking corpse. We know from the grim analysis of cesspits in the Viking city of Jorvik that his intestines were a battleground. He was host to Ascaris lumbricoides, the giant roundworm, a creature that can grow up to 14 inches long and live for 2 years inside you, stealing your food, causing agonizing blockages. He also carried Trichuris trichiura, the whipworm, which uses a long, thread-like needle to literally sew itself into the lining of the gut, drinking your blood. Think about that feeling, the constant, low-grade fever, the gnawing emptiness in your stomach that no amount of food can fill, the disquieting sensation of movement deep inside your own body. This wasn't an anomaly. This was the baseline human condition for the Viking people. The evidence from their remains is so overwhelming that archaeologists have concluded that nearly every single person was chronically infected from childhood until death. This warrior, capable of crossing storm-tossed seas and splitting a shield with one blow, spent every moment of his life at war with a biological horror he couldn't even see. He was being eaten alive from the inside out. So how is this possible? How does a civilization endure when its people are walking plagues? To find the source of this infection, we must first dismantle the biggest lie ever told about them. A comfortable myth that hides a truly disgusting reality. The truth is, their cleanliness was the most dangerous thing about them. That sounds impossible, doesn't it? How can cleanliness be dangerous? To understand, you first have to erase the image of the Viking you hold in your mind. Forget the brutish savage caked in mud and grime, with a tangled, filthy beard. That's a caricature, a convenient piece of propaganda cooked up by monks and scribes who wanted to portray their attackers as subhuman monsters. It's an easy image to believe, but it's a lie. The archaeological record proves it. We have found their grooming tools in their graves, laid beside them as prized possessions for the afterlife. Tweezers, razors, delicate ear spoons, and combs. So many combs, often beautifully carved from bone and antler. They were not unkempt. They were meticulous. And newly examined records from their enemies paint a picture that is far more complex and far more disturbing. An English chronicler, a man named John of Wallingford, writing about the Danish presence in the 11th century, left behind a testimony that completely shatters the myth of the filthy savage. He complained bitterly that the Viking invaders were far too popular with English noblewomen, and he gave a very specific reason why. It was their obsession with hygiene. According to Wallingford, the Danes made a point to comb their hair every single day, to change their woolen clothes regularly, and most shockingly of all to the Saxons, who might bathe only a few times a year, they bathed every Saturday. Imagine the sensory shock of that. In a world where most people carried a powerful, personal odor, the Vikings smelled of soap and wood smoke and clean wool. They were dangerously clean, which brings us back to the horrifying paradox we started with. If they were so far ahead of their contemporaries in personal grooming, why were their bodies cesspools of parasitic filth? How could a people who carried combs into the afterlife be simultaneously dying from the inside out? The two facts feel like they can't exist in the same universe. But they do. We have a victim teeming with parasites, and a suspect obsessed with hygiene. The evidence doesn't add up, unless the very act of cleaning was the murder weapon. And fortunately for us, there was a witness, a man from a completely different world who watched their most intimate morning ritual and was so utterly disgusted by what he saw that he wrote down every single horrifying detail. That witness was a man named Ahmad Ibn Fadlan. He was not a Viking nor their enemy. He was a sophisticated, educated diplomat from the court of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. A man accustomed to a world of science, poetry, and strict religious laws regarding cleanliness. In the year 922 AD, his travels brought him to the Volga River in modern-day Russia and into the heart of a trading camp of the Rus's Swedish Vikings, a long way from home. He watched them, studied them, and he wrote everything down in a detailed report, a hidden record that provides a window into their world. And one morning, he watched a ritual so alien, so profoundly unhygienic, that it shook him to his core. He describes how a slave girl would enter the chieftain's tent, carrying a single large basin of fresh water. Picture it. The air is cold. The water is clean. The chieftain then begins his daily grooming. He washes his face and his hands. He submerges his head, washing his hair and beard, and then meticulously combs them out, all in this one basin. So far, so normal. But then the ritual takes a turn. Ibn Fadlan watches as the chieftain leans over the water and, with a guttural hack, clears his throat and spits a thick glob of phlegm directly into the basin he just washed in. Then he blows his nose into the same water. He leaves, in Ibn Fadlan's own words, no dirt behind. And this is the moment the true horror begins. The slave girl does not empty the bowl. She lifts the basin, now clouded with spit and mucus and grime, and carries it to the next warrior in the tent. He repeats the entire process, and then the next man, and the next, and the next. That single bowl of water becomes a shared sewer, a communal soup of human filth, passed from man to man until the entire household has used it. This is the solution to our paradox. Their obsession with grooming was real, but their understanding of hygiene was fatally flawed. They saw cleanliness as the removal of visible dirt, with no concept of the invisible world of germs and bacteria they were sharing. Their morning ritual of cleanliness was, in fact, a perfect delivery system for disease. This disgusting habit explains how a sickness could pass from one man to the next with terrifying efficiency. But it doesn't explain the plague of worms breeding inside their guts. For that, the source had to be constant. It had to be inescapable. It had to be the very ground they walked on and the place they called home. And so we follow the trail of contamination from the shared basin to the one place the Viking called home. We have this romantic image of the longhouse, don't we? A great, smoky hall filled with the warmth of a central hearth, the smell of roasting meat, a place of community and stories. But the forensic evidence, dug from the earth around these very halls, reveals a secret that is hiding in plain sight. The real horror wasn't what was happening inside the longhouse. It was what was building up, layer by putrid layer, right outside the door. You see, the Vikings had no concept of organized waste disposal. There was no garbage pit, no designated dump, there was only the door. So when a meal was finished, the bones and scraps were tossed into the yard. When a clay pot broke, the shards were thrown out the door. Ash from the fire, animal entrails from butchering, spoiled food, broken tools, and yes, even animal and human excrement, it all went to the same place. Over weeks, months, and then generations. This created something archaeologists call a midden. It is, to put it plainly, a mountain of garbage. A massive, festering, semi-solid heap of everything a household discarded. And it was their front lawn. Visual. An animation shows layers of waste accumulating around a longhouse, slowly raising the ground level over time. The stench in the summer heat would have been unimaginable. A thick, gagging cloud of rot and ammonia that clung to everything. It would have attracted swarms of flies, armies of rats. And this wasn't some distant problem. This was their immediate environment. The Viking longhouse became an island fortress in a literal sea of its own filth. In some long-occupied sites, the midden grew so high that the original doorway is now buried several feet below the surface. They were literally living on top of a stratified monument to their own waste. And this is the incubator. This is the breeding ground for the parasitic plague we saw in their bodies. The worm eggs would thrive in this environment, contaminating their water, clinging to their boots, being tracked into their homes, getting onto their hands and into their food. The horror was inescapable because they were living inside their own sewer. This was the reality for a single, isolated farmstead. But what happened when hundreds of these families, each with their own midden, crowded together behind the walls of a town? What happens when you scale up this system of waste disposal to the size of a city? The result wasn't just a bigger pile of garbage. It was a biological catastrophe, the evidence for which was found perfectly preserved for 1,000 years. That biological catastrophe had a name. It was called Jorvik. Today we call it York, in the north of England, but in the 10th century, it was one of the most powerful and prosperous Viking cities in the world. A hub of trade, craft, and culture. And in the 1,972, a team of archaeologists was given a once-in-a-lifetime chance to excavate its heart. What they found beneath a modern-day street at a site known as Coppergate was a time capsule. The wet, oxygen-poor soil had preserved everything, creating a perfectly detailed snapshot of Viking life. And as they dug down through the layers of history, they found it. A 10th century latrine pit. It was an archaeologist's dream, a treasure trove of information. But when the soil samples from that pit were sent for microscopic analysis, the dream became a nightmare. The lab technicians found that the soil was saturated, absolutely teeming with millions upon millions of parasite eggs. Specifically, the eggs of Ascaris lumbricoides, the giant maw-worm, and Trichuris trichiura, the whipworm. They even found evidence of the fecal-oral tapeworm, Taenia saginata. The concentration was unlike anything they had ever seen. The lead parasitologist on the dig, Dr. Andrew Jones, noted the sheer density of the infestation. A single gram of this ancient, preserved soil contained thousands of eggs. Think about that. An amount you could hold on the tip of your finger contained a biological army. The conclusion was as inescapable as it was horrifying. Virtually the entire population of Jorvik, every man, woman, and child, was suffering from a crippling chronic infestation of intestinal parasites. They hadn't just uncovered a toilet. They had uncovered the epicenter of a citywide plague that had lasted for generations. The scientists had found the murder weapon, and the crime scene was an entire city. But the forensic report can't tell you what it felt like to be the victim. What was the daily, grinding reality of living with a body that was at war with itself? What did it feel like to be one of the citizens of this prosperous, parasite-ridden city? The answer is, it felt like a slow death. A life sentence of pain and decay hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly powerful people. Can you imagine what that felt like? Day in and day out? Let's be specific. The maw-worm, Ascaris lumbricoides, is a relentlessly efficient nutrient thief. As you ate your meager meal of bread and stew, this creature, growing up to a horrifying 14 inches long inside your small intestine, would steal the best of it before your body ever could. The result is a constant, gnawing hunger and a state of perpetual malnutrition. The bloating and cramping would have been a daily reality, a dull, aching fire in your gut that never went away. And a heavy infestation could lead to a physical blockage of the intestine, a death of unimaginable agony. Then there was the whipworm, Trichuris trichiura. This parasite is more insidious. It uses its long, thread-like body to literally stitch itself into the lining of your bowels, where it feeds on your blood. This causes chronic inflammation and internal bleeding, leading to anemia, iron deficiency, and dysentery. The unending diarrhea described by experts wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a debilitating condition that drained the body of fluids and strength. This wasn't an acute sickness that you could recover from. It was a chronic state of being. The expert analysis from the Jorvik digs paints a picture of a population suffering from a universal lethargy. The Viking body, which we imagine as a finely tuned weapon, was in reality a battlefield. A constant, grinding war between the host and a vast internal army of parasites that could not be defeated. How much sheer will would it take to swing an axe when you're anemic and in constant pain? How do you build a city or cross an ocean when your body is failing you every single day? This constant internal agony was the great unseen secret of the Viking world, a horror hidden deep inside their bodies. But it wasn't the only one. There was another kind of suffering, another kind of horror that wasn't hidden at all. It was a pain they inflicted on themselves, and they wore it on their faces for all to see, right in their smile. Let's talk about that smile, because before we even get to the horror they inflicted on themselves, we have to understand the agony their mouths were already in. But the horror wasn't just internal, you could see it in their smile. The Viking diet was the primary culprit. Their daily bread was made from coarse grains like barley and rye, milled on stone querns. This process introduced a significant amount of sand and rock grit into every single bite of food they ate. Over a lifetime, this acted like sandpaper, literally grinding their teeth down to flat, useless stumps. Skeletal remains from this era show a level of dental attrition that is shocking to modern orthodontists. The protective enamel was worn completely away, exposing the sensitive dentin underneath, and eventually, the raw, screaming nerve pulp at the center of the tooth. This led to constant, blinding pain. Every meal would have been an ordeal. And with the nerves exposed, infection was inevitable. Skulls show evidence of massive abscesses, pockets of pus building in the jawbone, creating systemic infections that could, and often did, kill them. But for some Viking warriors, this canvas of decay and agony was something to be embellished. The hidden records from their own bones show something far stranger. On numerous skulls of Viking men, particularly from burial sites on the island of Gotland, archaeologists have found deep, horizontal grooves deliberately filed into their front teeth. This wasn't damage from tools or tasks. These were intentional, patterned, and skillfully executed modifications, a form of self-mutilation we still don't fully understand. Was it the mark of a specific warrior cult? A rite of passage? A form of psychological warfare designed to intimidate their enemies? Picture it now. A warrior stands before you in the heat of battle. His breath is a foul stench of rot and infection from the abscess in his jaw. He snarls, and you see not just the yellowed, worn-down stubs of his teeth, but 2, maybe 3, perfectly straight, dark lines carved across each one, lines perhaps filled with black charcoal or red ochre pigment to make them stand out. It's a vision from a nightmare, and it is the ultimate contradiction. A people who endured unimaginable internal agony, yet were so concerned with their appearance that they undertook a painful modification of their own bodies. How can a person who lives surrounded by filth and disease simultaneously be so invested in curating their own terrifying image? The answer to that question, that impossible contradiction, isn't found in the story of their suffering, but in the silent artifacts they chose to take with them to the grave. Because when archaeologists unearth a Viking burial, they find their story told in objects. They find the sword, the axe, and the shield boss, the tools of the warrior. But right there beside them, given equal importance, they find the tools of the groomer. And here is the ultimate paradox. In the graves of these parasite-ridden people, we find their most prized personal possessions. Combs made of bone and antler, often intricately decorated, with fine teeth for styling and coarse teeth for detangling. We find bronze tweezers for plucking stray hairs, and we find one of the most intimately strange objects of the ancient world, the delicate metal ear spoon, a small scoop designed for the single purpose of cleaning wax from the ear canal. These are not the belongings of a people who have given up on their appearance. They were obsessed with it. A Viking warrior would carry his comb with the same pride as his dagger. They were a fundamental part of their identity. So, now, hold these two realities in your mind at once. The Viking warrior standing over the communal basin, sharing a morning brew of spit and mucus, would later spend an hour meticulously combing his beard. The woman suffering from the agonizing cramps of dysentery would carefully braid her hair. The man with the filed teeth and a jaw full of rotting abscesses would pause to clean his ears with a dedicated tool. They lived in a world of profound, inescapable filth. Yet they were utterly devoted to the art of personal grooming. How could a people so meticulous about their appearance be so utterly blind to the contamination that was killing them from the inside out? They could see the dirt on their skin, but were oblivious to the universe of disease they lived and breathed. So we are left with this impossible picture: a people both clean and filthy, both vain and septic. We have spent this entire time looking at their habits as a weakness, as a disgusting failure. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if this constant grinding war with an enemy they couldn't see didn't make them weaker? What if it made them stronger? The answer, as terrifying as it is that it made them immeasurably stronger. We have been looking at this entire story through the wrong lens. We, with our modern knowledge of germ theory and sanitation, see their habits as a disgusting failure. But that's a luxury of hindsight. If you look at it through the cold, hard lens of survival and power, you see a horrifying success. We've looked at this as a story of disgusting habits. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. It wasn't about hygiene. It was about power. The true strength of the Viking wasn't their axe or their longship. It was an immune system forged in a crucible of filth. Think about it. A modern human, raised in our relatively sterile world, would be crippled within weeks by the biological assault of their environment. The water, the food, the very air was saturated with pathogens and parasites that our bodies have no defense against. But the Vikings were born into it. Their childhood was a brutal gauntlet of disease that would have culled anyone with a weak constitution. The survivors, the ones who grew into the warriors that terrified Europe, were those with the most robust immune systems imaginable. Their constant battle with disease and pain made them harder, more resilient. A lifetime of gnawing gut pain from parasites and throbbing dental abscesses would recalibrate your entire perception of suffering. The acute, searing pain of a sword wound in battle might almost be a relief from the chronic, grinding agony of daily life. Their filth wasn't just a liability, it was a filter, a horrific system of eugenics that ensured only the toughest survived to adulthood. Their resilience was their greatest weapon. They could march through unsanitary conditions, drink unsafe water, and eat poorly preserved food on campaign in a way that would have decimated other armies. They conquered kingdoms not in spite of their disgusting reality, but because of it. They had weaponized their own endurance. And this reveals a terrifying truth about human nature. We are defined not by what we avoid, but by what we can endure. For almost all of history, survival wasn't about comfort or cleanliness. It was about the sheer, stubborn ability to keep going when your body is screaming at you to stop. The Vikings didn't just accept this reality. They mastered it. They weren't just lords of the battlefield. They were kings of the midden heap. And that leaves us with one final, haunting thought about the invisible world that truly separates their time from ours. That invisible world is the one we live in today. A world understood through the microscope. A world of bacteria, of viruses, of germ theory. The story of Viking hygiene is the story of an invisible enemy. They fought gods, monsters, and kings. They conquered coastlines and navigated terrifying open oceans. But their greatest war was one they didn't even know they were fighting. It was a war waged in every shared basin of water, where sickness passed from man to man in a gesture of cleanliness. It was a war waged on the festering slopes of their own garbage heaps, where the eggs of parasitic worms waited to begin their life cycle inside a human host. It was a war waged inside their own guts, against an enemy that stole their food and drained their blood, leaving them in a state of perpetual agony. They were titans in the visible world, but they were helpless children in the microscopic one. The only thing that truly separates our comfortable reality from their world of filth and pain is knowledge, a single, revolutionary idea: that the deadliest things are often the things you cannot see. We look back at their lives with a sense of revulsion, a feeling of superiority. But that superiority is a fragile illusion. Our entire sanitized world is a complex, delicate machine, and it can be broken. We are only a catastrophic power failure, a contaminated water supply, a single antibiotic-resistant bacteria away from their reality. The difference between us and them is not strength. As we have seen, they possessed a resilience that is almost beyond our comprehension. The difference is a thin, protective barrier of scientific understanding. Remove it, and the invisible enemy they fought is waiting to fight us too. The Vikings' battle with filth was a war of ignorance, but they also fought other, darker battles, driven by faith and fear. The evidence for their rituals and the human victims they claimed has been hidden and suppressed for centuries. To see the archaeological proof of Viking human sacrifice, subscribe to our channel and click the bell, so you don't miss our next investigation into the darkness of the past.